Okay, this is section 3.2. We're going to be talking about the empirical rule. This is around homework problems 16, 17 from chapter 3. Okay, so the empirical rule says, it talks about the percentage of data for a bell-shaped curve, so it must be bell-shaped. About 68% of the data lies within one standard deviation. So if my mean is right here, if I add a standard deviation, subtract a standard deviation, that's about 68% of the data. About 95% is two standard deviations. So I take my mean and I add two standard deviations, subtract two standard deviations. So this much of it's about 95% of the data. And for three standard deviations, that's almost all of it. So I take the mean, I add three standard deviations, that's from here, and I subtract three standard deviations. That's about 99.7% of the data. That's kind of hard to see, but it's 99.7% of the data. Okay, so now we're going to apply it to the homework problem. Okay, so now to apply the empirical rule, it will say in the problem whether to use the empirical rule or the other example that might be like this is a Chebyshev's theorem. So it's a blood plate count of a group of women is bell-shaped with a mean of 246.1. This is my X bar. And a standard deviation of 64.2. So that's my S. Okay, it says what is approximate percentage of women that are within two standard deviations or between 117.1 and 134.4. Okay, so it says within two standard deviations. So let's go back to the empirical rule. The empirical rule says two standard deviations is about 95% of the data. So if I take my X bar and I add two standard deviations or I subtract two standard deviations, that should be 95% of the data. This should be 95% of the data. And I just want to show you this too. If I take X bar, 246.1, plus or minus two standard deviations, so 2 times my 64.2, I get 246.1 plus or minus 128.4. The 128.4 is found by multiplying 2 times 64.2. If I subtract 246.1 minus 128.4, I get the 117.7. And if I add, I'll get the 374.5. Okay, so here's another one. This one says approximately what percentage of women counts are between 53.5 and 438.7. Okay, those end up being three standard deviations. So again, I took my X bar plus 3 times the standard deviation and minus the standard deviation. 3 times the standard deviation, 3 times the standard deviation, 3 times 64.2 is 192.8. If I take 246.1 minus 192.8, I'm going to get the 53.5. And if I add it, I'm going to get 438.7. So these two numbers are 3 standard deviations around the mean. This is 3 standard deviations below the mean, which means it's over here. And this one is 3 standard deviations above the mean, so that would be over here. So since there's 3 standard deviations away from the mean, the percentage would be 99.7. If that's hard to see, you can also look over here.